welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica from Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and I'm really excited to have a #1 New York Times bestselling author here, who I'm so thrilled for you. She wrote a book that is really something very different, something very special. I couldn't put it down. Shannon Spann, welcome to Turn the Page.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. Let's talk about a stage set. I can't talk. A stage set for villains.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really it's a title that really like it feels very rich. And you can't talk too much about the story without spoiling it because it has so many layers. Oddly enough, I went to a performance after finishing reading it, and I was just
Aw.
like, oh, I know it wasn't even planned that way, but it really is just a well staged story. The minute I opened it, I had like this feeling that I got when I read The Night Circus years and years ago. I don't know if
Oh.
you've ever read The Night Circus.
So I haven't, but a couple of people have said that to me, and I'm like, clearly I need to go read this book. It sounds awesome.
It is because, like I said, like I got like it's the same vibe, but not the same story. And I mean that in the most loving way. So, why don't
Mhm.
you talk to us a little bit about yourself and then tell us about where this story came from for you?
Sure. Yeah, so before I get into it, I just want to say you kind of already touched on it, but a couple of people have said, like, what do I do with myself after finishing this book? And my answer is always like, go see a play, go see a show, go see a musical, something. So that's been my answer. But yeah, I am a debut author, and this is a book that has been in the works for a pretty long time now. I'm gonna give you my little elevator pitch just in case anyone listening doesn't know what it's about, but A Stage Set for Villains is a Greek mythology inspired dark fantasy about a girl who is desperate to break this curse that is slowly starting to kill her. And in order to do so, she infiltrates this deadly competition that takes place in a magical traveling theater known as the Playhouse. And there she strikes a bargain with its lead player to save her life. And it's on shelves now, and as of this last week, it's a #1 New York Times bestseller, which is so exciting. But as far as like where the book kind of came from, the first thing I can remember, as far as like that inkling, that first spark of a author idea, was it's a little spooky, but I woke up and I was in that weird place between dreams and like fully sleep, fully consciousness, just that like in between space. And I felt this like whisper in my ear, and the words that I heard ended up becoming the words to the end of the curtain call in the book. And for anyone listening, please don't flip to curtain call because you'll get very, very spoiled if you do. But it kind of left me with a very unsettled, eerie feeling. And I'm sure I was just dreaming and the voice just kind of was like a dream. But I wrote those words down and I couldn't quite get them out of my head. And that kind of started me on my journey to writing it.
Were you a writer before this?
I was always writing something, is what I would say. I had made a couple of different attempts at books, and this isn't the first book that I've written. Something that's been consistent with everything that I've written, though, is that I never show people. So, as long as I can remember, I've been like in a Word document doing a thing and coming up with like fun worlds and characters and stuff. But I was really cagey about it. I think I started when I was around like 14 or 15 years old, is around the time I started writing. And yeah, I didn't tell anyone about even this book until it was edited and ready to query and start that publishing journey. But I've always been pretty secretive.
So the story itself is just a really interesting concept where the main character Riven, she lives in a world where the gods are no longer really present, but there are these immortal creatures called players that almost uh, that almost like fit that role, but they're revered for some and feared for others.
Hmm.
And when we meet her, she's being coached on how to keep them away.
Hmm.
But that doesn't work so well for her, which is not really a spoiler
No,
because,
not a spoiler.
yeah, not a spoiler at all. But it is a really interesting concept and like almost like this pantheon of, archetypes. You are clearly a fan of mythology, but this is such a fresh take on it. Do you want to just chat a little bit about the players themselves and, Riven and where they all sort of came together? Did they come before story or did story build around them?
The players came a little bit later, that probably later than people would expect them to. So the story in the magical playhouse was sort of always part of it. I always knew there was like this dangerous casting call competition type, and that the playhouse itself was very fantastical. The earlier versions of this book didn't actually have the players as we see them on the page today as these like fantastical, almost demigods in a little bit of a way, but they were not powerful immortal beings, if I remember, in the very earliest rendition of this story. However, this book kind of ended up blending my love for mythology with my love of theater and the beginnings of theater. And those things are so closely tied together because theater began in ancient Greece, it began in Athens. So I think when I was working on this, I was really diving specific, and there's you will never find an end to mythology or the different variations of different myths. There is like no end to it. There is so much. So I decided to focus really specifically on the lore around Dionysus, who is my favorite Greek god. I think he is so interesting, and there's a lot of different variations of him, some of which are actually quite dark. Like we think of him as the party god, but he has a very dark history in some variations. And he is the god of theater and revelry and wine. And I got thinking about like what kind of monster would come from Dionysus. If Dionysus was gone, dead, what kind of monsters might come from like his soul, his blood? Like what would that be? What would that look like? And I started working on the players. And when I was creating the players, really my mind was on what if we took different aspects of the theater of performance and exaggerated to a magical extent. So, for instance, the players, their faces are very exaggerated, and we get these scary descriptions of like their smiles almost like reaching their ears. And the reason that is because in ancient Greece, in order for people to see the expressions on actors' faces from like the farthest rows in the back, the actors would wear these very exaggerated masks. So there are like little things in the book that are just nods to the history behind theater. And I thought of like costumes, like actors wear costumes. So we get this magic called mimicry where they can look like someone else entirely. We get the idea of compulsion from like if you've ever been in the front row of a theater and you've been moved to tears or been moved to do something or believe something just because the performance was so provoking. Like I was thinking in terms of like, well, an actor could convince you to do something. Like what if they told you or like instilled this emotion in you and you were like moved to do it? So that's where I got this idea for compulsion. And then, there are some other things. I'm not going to go into it just because I will have a tendency to spoil and I have to hold myself back from it. But that's a little bit on the magic system and a little bit on the inspiration for the players. It just was a way to combine several of the things I really, really love.
I can tell you have a love of theater for sure.
Oh, really? Really? Can you
Yeah,
tell?
no, I mean, but I could tell that from reading the book also. Another thing, and I know I've read some places that kind of allude to this, but I don't want to talk. I'm going to talk around it the best I can. You have a very interesting way of handling dialogue, and it drops the reader into feeling like they are a player themselves or a part of the play themselves versus when they're sort of on the outside versus the inside with Riven. I mean, I again, like without trying to talk too much about it, that was wild and probably like one of the moments that really first caught me and, dragged me into this world. How did you approach that specifically, trying not to talk too much about what it
No, no,
is.
we can kind of get into it. So here's my thought. It reminds me a little bit, and I think kind of what I was trying to capture without thinking about it directly, but like looking back, I think this is kind of what I was trying to do was I think a little bit about Wizard of Oz and when our main character Dorothy is wandering around this very colorless world and it feels very drab and sad, and then she walks into Oz and like there's color and there's beauty and there's all of these magical things. I wanted there to be kind of a before and after when Riven walks into the playhouse, and there are certain theatrical elements I pulled in that were meant to make it feel distinctly different and like something has just started, right? Like you are an audience member and something has just started. And without getting too far into like the dialogue and things like that, what I would encourage anyone listening to is pay attention to the dialogue and see if you can kind of unravel some of the Playhouse's secrets as you go.
There's a lot of like a a balance between what makes somebody a protagonist, what the cost is for someone to be a protagonist, and what the cost is for someone to be a villain and what that means. I can't imagine what the notes for this book looked like for you. Did you plot very heavily, or were you basically wandering around Oz or Wonderland or the Playhouse with Riven?
You know, I think I was more of a wanderer than a heavy plotter. I actually did try to outline the book a few times, and I found, like, sadly, the only way I seem to be able to, like, really get a book brainstormed on paper, and by paper, I mean my notes app, is to keep track of all of the ideas that I have for a book. And I'm going to throw 80% of them out anyways, but I keep everything in a single like notes app. They're not even in like separate notes. Like it's all just one long note per book. And sometimes that note will be like 60,000 words. And then I bring it all over to a Word document, sort it out, and generally only keep a little bit of it. But in this book in particular, it felt very much like a trust the process. I think if trust the process were a person, it would look a lot like me, unfortunately. But I remember distinctly that Riven and Jude as characters were really the drivers of this since like the beginning. Like I felt like I was sitting down to watch an episode of my favorite TV show every time I sat down to write because I felt like I was following these characters through this really strange and unique world and I wanted to know more, but they were kind of only willing to disclose little bits and pieces at a time. There were a few like major plot beats that I knew were coming, and there were like people asked me about like the twist in this book a lot, and obviously we're not going to spoil what the twist is, but there are a couple pretty big pivots in this book, and the big one I always knew. But some of the smaller ones were a little bit surprising to me as I went, but they unraveled in such an organic and like easy way that I was like, oh, this was always meant to be part of the story. So I think this book was written in like my favorite way to write a book where I'm kind of discovering it a little bit with the reader, and a lot of work happens in the revisions, and I have to fix things that I messed up. But this book, all things considered, actually did not go through a ton of like overhauling or rewrites once I had that solid draft of it.
So it's interesting because it's YA, but I feel like it transcends YA also. There's so many, books that are coming out that are considered romantasy or dark romantasy. I feel like this is like on such a line where, yes, it can be, and this is not to disparage YA at all. I love YA, but yes, it can be YA, but I feel like it's very much a crossover. Had you had an age group really in mind when you started writing it?
I've never had an age group in mind for writing anything, if I'm honest with you. I think like something I really strive to do is write stories that can be enjoyed by anyone. Someone sent me a picture of their 90-year-old dad reading the book the other day, and it made me smile so, so big. And he was just a general fantasy reader who was enjoying the book. Something I really, really treasure about YA and have always treasured about YA is that it's a genre that focuses on transformation, right? So YA is usually like in a very in between place where you're figuring out who you are in the world. And um, I think Riven is doing that. She is figuring out who she is in the world in this book. And it has a lot of themes that I think are extremely relevant to the YA category. But it's been really heartening for me to see this book in both the hands of teens and adults. And again, a fellow in his 90s. I think that's awesome. And that sentiment has been echoed to me like, hey, I connected with this and I'm not necessarily a YA reader and or like, hey, I am a YA reader and I connected with this. So I think it was always, I never wanted to limit it to being this is just for like 16 to 18. This is upper YA, so it's recommended 16 plus, but like it's not just for 16 to 18-year-olds, but I wanted it to be accessible for that age group as well. So that was the goal. It's just a story meant to be enjoyed. It's not a story meant to be enjoyed by only this small group of people. I want it to be accessible to everybody.
And you did a wonderful job. You must be so excited to be a bestseller.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It has been a surreal experience. I got the huge privilege of going on book tour this last week, and I got to meet so many readers at different events, and they are so lovely. And so many came with amazing questions, like they'd already read the book. I was really surprised because this is a long book, it is 500 plus pages. But they came with such thoughtful questions, brought beautiful handmade gifts. Like I was really absolutely shaken in the best way possible by all of those interactions. It has been the best time of my life, honestly.
Well, I am thrilled for you, and it is so well deserved. Really, this book was so much fun. I devoured it. It's gorgeous physically, and
Oh, it is, and that
right?
is all creds to the designer who did that gorgeous cover. Her name is Elizabeth Turner Stokes. She is a genius, and my favorite thing to tell people about the cover is take a second look at it after you finish the book because you're going to notice some fun little symbolic things that you may have not caught before. And I think that cover is just so, so clever.
Agreed, 110%. So this is a standalone, right?
Mhm. It is. It is a standalone for a couple different reasons. I think I'm better at writing standalones than I am at plotting out a full series, to be honest. I am somebody who really, really enjoys like bringing that arc full circle. I also like have a mixed feel like relationship with cliffhangers and waiting for the next book. I think I love getting invested in a series, but I also think there's a lot of series right now and maybe there's space for some more standalones out there. So I kind of wanted this to help fill that gap. But I love both dearly. Maybe I'll try a series one of these days. I really always liked the idea that this is this self-contained story with room to expand the world. It doesn't mean we'll never see this world again, but as far as like a stage set for villains, I don't plan on writing a stage set for villains to the sequel, you know.
I don't, and I think that that makes a lot of sense, right? You know, there is stuff in the world, but I think that the story itself is very nicely contained. So, thank you so much for writing it. Are you looking to write something next? Are you kind of taking a bit of a break?
I'm taking a tiny break and working on something new. And by break, I mean I am always doing something. And I don't know how to not be productive. I am one of those people who probably needs to slow myself down a little bit. But I am so excited for what is coming next. And even though I can't talk about it just yet, know that I am in the background plotting.
Thank you so much. A stage set for villains is out. Grab it, read it. It's great. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.